Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday, happy Christmas, holidays, Hanukkah, and all of that. Thanks for joining us on a Friday morning before the holidays. You know, Schedules are tight this time of year, so we appreciate you making time for us. Um, Real quickly, for those of you that are new to the process, the way you can access the data packet for your region is pretty simple. You go to the Illinois WorkNet website that I'm sharing with you now. And here is the main web address, illinoisworknet.com/WIOA. If you go to the menu, to the regional and LWIA information, go down to and highlight WIOA Regional Planning. And I'll share the link directly here in the chat pod shortly. But if you go to this link, click on that, you will go to the web page that is dedicated to all things regional and local planning for WIOA. And my little circle is churning up here. So there it is. So on this page, you see the LWIA and regional map, some access to FAQs, updated planning guidance, a link back to the prior page that had all of the information on it. And then the data packets themselves are on the lower right-hand side under the regional data packets heading, and they are saved as PDFs. So you may go to any of these and open and download them at your leisure. Going forward, if you have any questions or have any items that you would like maybe a deeper dive on, or maybe some insight on something that's not in the packet, or if you have questions about the packet themselves later, you can contact the labor market economist here at Employment Security, represented by Marty Johnson, who leads that group, and she can get your request parsed out to the appropriate people. We also are happy to do a one-on-one session with any regional planning team that would like to do so, to go over your packet individually. Today, we're just going to go over the central region, just because it's at the top of the list, as a representative sample of the data that's in the packet. The slides the format is the same across all of the packets, just the information is tailored to each region. So if you've seen one and know how it works, you know how it works in all of them. But if any group would like a kind of a one-on-one session to go over your specific plan, let us know, and we would be happy to set that up. I'm going to put the link to this planning page into the chat pod, so that you can go directly to it at any time in the future if you so wish. Okay. So with that, we'll come back to the central packet. So we'll be tag teaming this. I will handle the first few slides, then I'm going to hand off to Marty Johnson at the Department of Employment Security to handle most of the economic and labor market slides. And then we also have Jay Brooks from the Illinois Community College Board, who will go over the community college completer data and enrollment data. Actually, it's completer data for you, and kind of show you how that works. And that can get like all data, it can get a little hinky because as the cover of the central region shows, we've got the LWIA map here in color in the middle, but then you can see that there are multiple community college districts that overlap the territory of the region, and the red dots are the community colleges. So that's how it works. So the cover map shows you where you're at in the state. The color coding on the map is the LWIAs within the region, and then the gray area and the red dots are community colleges and the region or the district associated with that community college. Okay. Our first slide is just population trends. This is the trend of the region and the region's proportion of population in the state, along with county population of counties in that region, off in a table to the side. And in all of these demographic slides here at the beginning, we have used the most recent data available. Most of it is through US Census Bureau. Occasionally we may use another source, but the source is always cited on the slide. Here's how the population breaks out by age groups within the region. So you can see the bar chart with the percentages, and then the table on the right shows you the actual number. Educational attainment within the region for people 25 and older. So you can see how the breakout is for each region, and also how it compares to the statewide number. The language or the population of the largest cities. So this is pretty straightforward. Here's a breakout of the veteran population by age group, by era of conflict they may have served, educational attainment level, and also racial ethnic breakdown. And again, this is tailored to the region. Here's the population with a disability by type and by age range. Main language spoken at home. If those folks that had a bachelor's degree, here are the large kind of buckets of type of degree they have. There's median income by different types of households, basically dual parent and then single parent by gender. And by county, of course. Then median income by county and race. And also at the top of each slide, often there is some text that provides additional context. So don't overlook that part at the top also on these slides. Percent living below poverty. Again, by age, race, demographic background, gender, and educational attainment level. And then the count. This slide is the percent. This slide gives you the actual numbers. And then for region specific, here is the information on target populations like low income, SNAP and TANF program participants, foster care information, etc. So that is the demographic data section. I'll now turn it over to Marty, and she will go into the labor market and economic data.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Mike. I trust that you can hear me. So great. So these next slides are about labor market information, and they're basically bucketed by topic. So as we shift from topic to topic, I'll note that you'll see down further in the slide deck itself that a lot of these look identical to the previous slide, and it's just they're all illustrating different points of the same concept. Here we're looking at labor force participation rates, and in general the slides or the regional packets compare the current EDR of question compared to the rest of Illinois. So the baseline comparison is always to the statewide numbers. So labor force participation rates, and then the next slide discusses the unemployment rate for central region compared again to the rest of the state. So the next topic queued up, Mike, please, are the sector information. So we're looking at a table right now that lists all the super sectors categorized by their North American Industry Code, which is otherwise dubbed the NAICS code. Down the first column there, it doesn't look like it's in any particular order, but the codes for the NAICS start at 000 and the numbers progress. So these are organized in order of the NAICS numeric data, which isn't appearing on this page. So that's why it's an odd kind of assortment jumping around. It's not alpha order. But this table contains a lot of data. So if you're wanting to flag a particular slide that would be very valuable to come back to, this is probably a good one. We could spend 30 or 40 minutes on this slide alone. Truthfully, there's just that much information. But the main point that we're illustrating here, it's projections information. Where do we see the jobs coming online for this particular region in the next decade, and the percentage change? And in the far right-hand column is that that economic development concept that we refer to as the location quotient. And I'm going to take just a minute to talk about that, because that informs the many of the following charts that we're going to look at. So we look at location quotient when we're studying economic development and how we can improve our economic situation. When we focus on specific clusters, the state itself or the region can more effectively focus on the competitive advantage that is already in existence in this particular area. And so we categorize the strength of concentration based on employment numbers, and we code them according to where they fit in terms of the baseline comparison. In this case, the baseline is actually the US. So for the location quotient data, we're not comparing to the rest of Illinois, it is to the nation as a whole, which is a broader perspective for the location quotient. You can see in the light blue, the legend is down below, those are the leading sectors, and we identify leading industries as those that are expected to grow during this 10-year projection period, in this case 10 years, which are important to this particular region. So there's a specialized cluster already that has established itself. In this case, because we're looking at the central region, you can see agricultural production is one of those, utilities is another, government there at the bottom. The maturing sectors, however, are those that have already peaked in terms of employment, but they continue to stay important to the region. Those are coded as the maturing industries, and you can see those on this particular graph. Retail trade falls in that category. So it's not as strong a current regional strength as those others in the leading category, but they are expected, any industries ranked maturing are considered to be still growing. There will still be some growth in the future. And then the emerging sectors are those, and again, let me back up a second. These categorizations, of course, will flow across all 10 of the economic development regions. So these are the generic definitions that would apply to any particular region. The emerging sector are those in which the region doesn't have a current strength, but the head count or the employment numbers are suggesting that in the future, this region will become more and more important to the area. This sector will become more important to the region. So that's termed emerging. So again, flag this particular table if you're wanting to look to see what areas are strongest currently in the region and what's projected for the next decade. if you could move to the next slide, Mike, we can see on the bubble chart a little bit better. They're clustered there kind of in the middle of the axes. But in the upper right, you see those leading sectors that we just described. This is just a visual of that particular table that we just looked at. Moving on to the next slide, please.
Marty, I'd like to take a second just to point out,
Sure.
for those of you that are
Yes.
seeing this bubble chart for the first time, to go along with what Marty was saying on the leading, maturing, and emerging, if a sector has a greater concentration of workers, it has a higher location quotient or a value greater than 1. So it's above the x-axis. And if it's growing, it's to the right of the y-axis. If it's not growing, it's to the left of the y-axis. Okay, so if you can see my mousing around here, so if you have a stronger concentration of workers in your region, so you've got a higher location quotient, you're up here. And if you're growing and up here, you're over here. And then the different size of the bubbles represents the number of workers, in the region. So that's why you have some bubbles that are big and some bubbles that are small.
Thanks, Mike. That's terrific. This particular graph is a little bit hard to see, probably. I apologize. When you get the hard copy, you'll see it a little bit better. This is a tabulation of the impact of COVID on the super sectors that we've just looked at. Again, these are the same sectors that appeared in those earlier slides. This is to illustrate how far we've come since a point in time pre-COVID. We wanted year over years comparison. So you can see clear at the bottom along the x-axis, the starting point is October of 2019. And if you go clear to the right, you can see October of 21. So we're illustrating 2 years worth of employment numbers. And those are there on the left on the y-axis. And you can see by sector, which sectors have hit some level of recovery, which ones are still a little bit behind in terms of where we were pre-COVID. So this particular graph shows up in all of the 10 regions. And then the next several sectors will, next several slides will show us some other detail relative to other, the other regions in Illinois. But this one is specific per region, and it's a 2-year look at pre-COVID, which is October of 2019. Up until the most current data that we have, which is October of 21. And the way that these are stacked is by, I believe when we pull this together, by which sectors have the greatest head count. I also want to point out, you'll note that we don't have agriculture on this particular chart. That's because it uses a slightly different data set that is produced by the federal government, and this does not include the agricultural sector values. So that's why government appears at the top. It has the highest employment base, and then working down from there. So the next several slides, Mike, if you want to advance, please. We'll be looking more closely at these sectors, and again, comparing them to other areas across the state. So here we're looking at total employment, and we're looking year over change. So these values start, the starting point was October of 20. So effectively in somewhat the height of the COVID pandemic, October of 2020, and how far we've progressed since that point through October of 21. So the base starting point and how much growth we've added, and that's how you read this chart. Total farm employment, the rate of change. So this is total employment non-farm, and then the next 8 or 9 slides break it down by sector. Thank you, Mike. So we look at those, like for instance, this one is the construction industry by EDR. So each packet will have this point of comparison, and that way it'll be easier to understand within your own region, how do we compare in the construction sector across all of the other sectors in Illinois. You can see the blue bars denote a positive change, so growth over that 12-month time frame. Anything that's to the left of the 0 point on bottom is still yet to recover its employment from the pandemic's hit. So that's why you see that negative value there. All of these charts look very different from one another because the pandemic itself, and Mike, if you just want to kind of keep scrolling through these, there are 8 or 9 of them. The pandemic, of course, didn't hit all sectors at the same level. So point taken here with this particular chart, financial activities, many regions have not, quote unquote, recovered from the pandemic's hit. Several regions have. So this gives you an idea of regionally what's been affected at the different rates. So Mike, again, there are probably 4 more slides in a similar way. Leisure and hospitality. Manufacturing. Professional and business services. Retail trade. Transportation, warehousing, plus utilities, which is recovered across all sectors, all regions here in Illinois. So for a further dive or deeper dive into that, the sectors versus NAICS code versus how these are all categorized, this is your go-to tables and explanation. And that's several pages here, Mike, if you want to just keep scrolling through this. This is just boilerplate language included with all the packets so that you can better understand the location quotient, changes in employment, etc. Then we shift to the maps that are meant to illustrate employment changes and this location quotient over a time frame. In this case, it's a 12-month time frame ending the first quarter of 21. So quarter 1 of 2020, progressing to quarter 1 of 2021. So queued up here in each of your regional packets, you'll have about probably 20 maps, and they're all included here. We're going to just scroll through a lot of them, but I just want to describe to you the first several of these so that you know how to apply the logic. The color codes are to point out which areas have again had higher rates of employment. The ones that are in the gold, the orange, the kind of reddish tones, those are the areas that are still not recovered in terms of their employment count. And the darkest blue, however, on top are those that have had the highest rates of growth for employment. And again, the time frame is the most current that we had available. Again, a different data source, so it's not going to match the time frame of some of the earlier charts, unfortunately. But we have for each super sector, in this case, it's construction, we're looking at employment changes. And then I think, did we scroll through the map already, Mike, with the location quotient? That's next. Okay, so the next one down, again, is that location quotient. And these are going to be different in each of these. These are county level data, and you can see where the relative strength is for construction across the state. So the next 20 or so maps illustrate these points based on the different super sector, education and health services, etc. So we may want to just, for the interest of time, Mike, scroll through these quickly. I can pause now. If there are questions, please go ahead and pipe up or put them in the chat box. We're going through these, I understand, very quickly. I just don't want to cut short our some of the later slides. So, okay, yes, so that's the last map illustrating location quotient and then the employment changes. So again, that was another concept that we're kind of going to wrap up now, and I'm going to pass the baton to Jay to chat about the community college data that we've included in the packets.
Okay, thank you, Marty. Appreciate it. Good morning, everyone. So we will take just a few moments and share a couple of slides with you related to community college data. And a couple of things I want to say just sort of upfront in terms of kind of touching on what Mike said. For each of these packets, when you look at the community college data, we do have some community colleges that will go across EDRs. And so if that happens to be the case for your area, you'll see that the community college will appear in both of those EDRs with all of the data. We did, we just look at the community college in total, and if it serves either in whole or in part that EDR, it shows up in that EDR's data set. So what we have in the next couple of pages, to Mike's point earlier, we're providing you with some enrollment and some completion data. So none of this is census or survey. All of this is data that's provided directly to the community college board by local community colleges. And the data is provided both in terms of enrollment and in completion data. And so what we have here is, at the time of putting these packets together, is the most recent data available. Now, I'm going to go ahead and post in chat here just a quick link to the full data book, and it's also referenced in the document here. But we collect data on behalf of the community colleges, and all of the information is compiled. A couple of things I want to say about the chart you see here. The first two tables are breakouts of different completion types. So the first table is specifically related to career and tech ed programs, whereas the second table is related to those associate transfer awards. I do want to point out, I know oftentimes in your planning, especially when you're looking at career and tech ed, you might want to know, okay, well, I see there was X number of associate in applied science or certificates. What specific types of programs are students earning and graduating from their college with? So in the data book link that I posted, if you look at table 3.9, what you'll actually find is a breakout all the way down to the 6-digit SIP level. And if you're not familiar with SIPs, it was just the actual specific program, and it'll provide you the text value of what that 6-digit SIP means in table 3.9. But that way, if you want to look locally and say, okay, what types of CTE programs are students in our area completing, you can see that through that table. But these two tables break out those completions for the academic year 20 for both CTE and associate transfer awards. The table below kind of comes up a level and actually looks at more broadly at enrollment. So you can see in terms of declared majors and what students have indicated they're studying. You can see those numbers in that third table. The next page, the fourth table, is a part of this information here, takes the same sort of completion information, but breaks it out by career cluster. So it's organizing all of these various programs, these SIPs, into specific clusters, and again, specific to the EDR. And I think with that, I think the other point I would just reiterate is much more detailed information regarding all of this is available through those data books. And as we publish additional data, which fairly soon we'll see academic year 2021 coming online, that will all be available at that link that I posted in our data book section. So with that, I'll go ahead and kick things back over and Marty, is it coming back to you or to Mike?
Yes, it's coming back to me. Thanks, Jay. Great.
All right, thank you.
And let me pause here. Are there any other questions that we need to answer as we're moving through this? We're making really good time. So we have a bit of time if we wanted to pause for a question. Feel free to type it in the chat box. So as I said, the labor market information, we have it kind of clustered by topic. This particular topic was something that was introduced the last economic development plan when it was updated, and that's this concept of supply gap analysis. We are interested in coordinating our workforce efforts across all of our state partners, which includes, of course, economic development and job training programs and community colleges, to ensure that employers have the trained talent that they need to fill the jobs that they have open or will be coming online in the future. So we've recognized some years back that there were shortages in where we're producing talented workers, and there aren't enough that we're producing to fill the roles that we need to fill here in the state of Illinois. And so we wanted a way to illustrate how do we capture this concept of supply gap analysis to understand which occupations have the greatest shortages. And so the way that we've done this is to take a look at the sources of the supply, so to speak, those who are graduating at certain educational levels. And then we combined that information with the demand, which is what we looked at earlier, that projections data for what we expect employment needs to be over the next decade. And we merged those two sets of data. And the way to interpret these next several charts, and I'm not sure how many, there are maybe 6 or 7 of them that look nearly identical to this. And they're organized by certificate or educational level. The one we're viewing right now has to do with, the initial one was requiring a certificate or a license. And then we move up each additional chart. We'll look at other educational levels and other thresholds of education. Good, thank you, Mike, for progressing through. It doesn't really matter which of these charts we're looking at, but in order to interpret them, it's helpful to know for the supply demand gap, if it's a 1-to-1 ratio, we're at the 1.0 mark across the x-axis. If we're to the left of that point, so 0.70 here, for those requiring a bachelor's degree, elementary school teachers, excluding special education, 0.70. So we see right away a gap there. We're not producing through our educational programs enough to fill the roles that are coming online for elementary school teachers. By contrast, that top bar in this particular example, the supply gap ratio is 1.4. So we have a healthy pool of secondary teachers to pull from when we're wanting to fill our occupations in that category. So that's how one can interpret this particular chart. As we move down this particular chart, you see this is bachelor's degrees. Some of these are in the zeros. Part of the challenge is that we don't always have a full understanding of what the supply actually is for those titles. So unfortunately, we don't have all the data that can populate these charts to the extent that we'd like them to. But nonetheless, I think that the value in these next 4 or 5 charts is to understand, particularly if you're in the education part of our workforce system, where we need to be incentivizing our young people to perhaps choose particular careers that have real high demand expected for the future. On this chart, you can see those requiring more than a bachelor's degree. There's some shortages there: marketing managers, lawyers, sales managers. So that's how we interpret these charts. You can keep going, Mike. A few more of these, I think. Okay. As we talked about, part of the effort for the state plan is to identify demand occupations. Those are the occupations that over the next 10 years will have the greatest demand to fill. And for this last year of identifying these demand occupations, we had inserted another level of criteria, and that has to do with baseline pay. So the hope was to choose those occupations that have a minimum hourly wage that would be a living wage, so that we want to be promoting those occupations that once one reaches the experienced wage will be at a full living wage for an individual. So that's changed some of the calculus, so to speak, for the demand occupations. Certainly there are demand occupations that you probably say, well, this isn't on the list, it's not on the list. Most likely it's because the hourly wage wasn't high enough to reach that threshold of a minimum living wage. So these also, for those who are familiar with the demand occupations list, these are also those demand occupations that we will be able to use WIOA training dollars to help fund. And so the occupations that make the list, so to speak, this list that we're looking at, are those that are approved to for eligible training providers to provide services, and WIOA dollars can help offset the cost of those. Notice in the upper right-hand corner, it says region. Of course, we're looking at the central region. These demand occupations are sorted by region. So there will be a specific list for your region as your packets, if you want to drill into different other packets.
Yeah.
So again,
Marty,
go ahead, Mike. Yes,
Marty,
please.
I'm sorry, I need to jump in. I'm sorry. I don't know that every occupation on these lists is also on the WIOA Title I demand occupation training list. So just be mindful of that. When we say demand occupations here, we're talking generically in the sense that there is an economic demand for them. So if you're looking at these charts or the graphs, if you're wondering, how do we pick what was included here? We look at the occupations with the greatest number of openings that pay decent wages. Okay, so that's, the charts are tied to the information on these tables, and that's how they align. But just be mindful, if you're looking at this, I don't know that you can assume 100% that every occupation listed here is also on the Title I demand occupation training list. So it should be very close, but there may be some exceptions to that, so be careful with that. And along with the wages, like there's sometimes occupations have large number of openings and pay really well, but because they do not require much training beyond a high school level, they did not make the Title I approved training list, like demand occupation list. That's been evolving as local areas have petitioned to add occupations. I know the state is looking at some also. So, that list is always evolving. So just be careful when comparing that list and when you're talking about this list in your regional planning. So, thank you.
Great point. Thank you for that clarification, Mike. Yeah, very good points. I misspoke there. Okay, so those are the demand occupations. And again, what's interesting, I also want to point out here, I'm remiss to not point out the skills that are listed here. These are drawn from classification through the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and it highlights the most critical skills that those positions require when persons are attempting to seek work. Those are the skills that are highest in demand for these occupations. So moving on now, Mike, to the next group. So we're shifting now again to another concept in labor market information. These next final slides, I believe it's just, we have 8 of these left or so. These are sourced from an outside vendor we have worked with over the years called MC, which is also a Burning Glass, the Burning Glass company. Some of you might recognize from their Help Wanted online job ads. But MC is the parent company, and they, through their own analysts and their own economists, they have identified for the current year what the labor market activity is. Now, this is all preliminary data because it's essentially hot off the press. You can tell anything that's dated for 2021 is still going to be preliminary data, but nonetheless, through their calculations, they have a little bit more information available to them. We can see what's going on when we hear about this great resignation. Are people actually, what's going on with these labor market movements, these shifts of people in and out of work? Are they really unemployed, or are they just hoping for a better placement, a better job position? And so this allows us to look at some level, what percent or what numbers are hires, which are the separations, which are the ones that would be, it could be a voluntary separation, it could be a retirement, it could be separating from your firm to go get hired at a similar firm. And there's a calculated turnover ratios there. And the 2020 jobs, I'm guessing, Mike, that's going to be just the total amount of jobs that are shown as available or open for 2021, that last column there. So we've broken this down again by sectors, and Burning Glass or MC, they have their own classification system of sectors. So this sector in particular is agribusiness and ag tech. And you can see the occupation. So this is listed by occupation. So you can get a sense of what they're considering to be ag technology or manufacturing for ag. So we wanted to include these tables so that there was some understanding of, well, what is the movement in and out of jobs? Which positions have the highest amount of turnover by the percentage of ratio there? Here we're looking at the energy sector, again, broadly defined, and it's the Burning Glass classification. So I'm sure energy covers a broad area. These are going to be specific to statewide numbers. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike. I think we sourced these. These are Illinois values, or are these specifically for EDR? Were we able to drill down to EDR?
Yes, these are specific to the EDR.
Great, that's even more valuable. So healthcare is here. I think we have just a few more of these same tables.
So as anybody that's worked with data at all, you realize even the most simple question almost never has a clear-cut answer. Someone asked earlier in the chat, well, what good is 2018 data, after all the COVID stuff? So that's why we've included this data so that you can see, and some of the other slides that are, like show from October of 19 or October of 20 to October of 21. It may not exactly line up with other data elements that we've historically used. Like for example, here, Burning Glass and MC, they group things together slightly differently, but it's the only source of data that's newer than the traditional BLS data that is, from a couple of years ago. So you got to take the good with the bad. We felt it was worthwhile to include newer data, even though it doesn't quite align exactly with how we're used to seeing it, if only that we can understand what's been happening since the pandemic started. So we know it's not perfect, but we felt it was value added and we wanted to include it in the packet.
Great point, Mike. And is that our final? We're close to the end, I think.
Technology. Life sciences. Manufacturing. Logistics. And warehousing. I believe that's the last one. Yep, we're at the end. So again, in all of these tables, in your own data packet, the mixes they're going to be in the same order, but the occupations might be slightly different, and the numbers here to the right are certainly going to be different. So with that, we've got about 10 minutes left for some Q&A if anybody has any questions. We are available for a few more minutes.
Mike, this is Sarah in Elwea 20.
Hi, Sarah, go ahead.
I do have a question regarding the pages. Oh goodness, there's no page number on them. 60 and 59, where we were talking about the demand occupations. I think I just need a little more clarification on these pages. They're listed as demand occupations, but they might not be on the statewide list.
So yeah, that's what I was trying to point out. So I'm glad you're bringing this up. So let's be clear about this. Demand on this list is economic demand. What are this is driven off number of openings and wage data. Okay, so there is economic demand. That doesn't necessarily mean it's on the WIOA Title I demand occupation list. Okay, and I did raise at some point, okay, this is going to create confusion because we're using the same nomenclature for two slightly different things, and the decision was made, well, this is how the rest of the world uses these terms. If we change it up, it's going to be even more confusing. So
yeah, maybe I need clarification on the difference between economic demand and what the other demand that is being referred to.
Okay, so economic demand is strictly number of openings and combined with an algorithm for wages. Okay, so basically, where are the openings going to be? Not all of these occupations may be appropriate for the use of Title I funding. They may have incredibly high turnover rates. So it may have been deemed not appropriate for the use of Title I funding. There could be other factors. One of the things that we found in working with the TDL data was that logisticians and like logistics managers initially weren't on the demand occupation list because there's not a specific program of study post-secondary that's required for that occupation. So basically you could step into that role with not much more than a high school diploma. So even though there are tons of openings and the median wage is, past 40,000. Maybe not appropriate for Title I training because there really isn't training required in general beyond that. So that's the difference between the demand occupation training list and the economic demand list that we have here in the data packet. We tried to show you here what is happening economically. And I think Carolyn asked earlier, if we're seeing an economic demand, shouldn't we put that on our other list? My suggestion is this is a starting point. If you see an occupation on this list that's not on the demand training list in your region, it's a starting point for our conversation and a deeper dive into what's happening and understanding, okay, why isn't it on that list? And maybe it should be. Okay, so that was the point of this. We wanted to give you a larger net to look at, to make sure that if there is something that is important to your region that's not on the other list, maybe it's worth a conversation to do a deeper dive to figure out if it should be or not. So that was a great question, Carolyn. For the update to the plan concerning the implication. Well, okay, so the question is on the update to the plan, do we want Chapter 1 completely redone? You have to look at how specific you got in what you turned in last time. In some regional plans, it might require pretty much a complete rewrite. In other cases, you may be able to edit what you have or add additional information to go along with what you had. What we're doing for the state plan is to update based on what may have changed. A lot of information we included in the economic analysis last time is still pretty solid. Overall, the trends that we talked about of what's going to happen with the labor market is still going to happen. We're trending more toward automation. That hasn't stopped because of the pandemic. So there are a lot of things that we wrote 2 years ago that are still valid. The question is, what maybe blew up over the last 2 years that maybe requires rethinking and what's happening. So to that point, we do want to see that you understand what's happened in your region, your regional economy, and your regional labor market based on the pandemic. So the short answer to that question is maybe. Depends on how specific you wrote what you had prior, and how different things might be in your region based on what's happened over the last couple of years.
And so Mike, his follow-up is, so it is updated and not a completely new analysis.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. So if you have content there that is still valid, obviously there's no reason to take that out. But we just want to make sure that the planning team is thinking about what the economy and what the labor market is looking like. Yeah.
And Mike, did we include in the chat box a link to where all of the packets can be found? Anyone who
Yes.
joined a little bit late can review the chat box for that link where all the packets have been compiled.
Yeah, that's in the chat box, but I will add it there again now. So there it is again. Looks like we're about at our hour here. So if there are any other questions, we'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, if you would like a one-on-one review, let us know. We can set that up. And if you're aware of a new development that's going on in your area that you'd like us to try to take a look at through data, we'd be happy to try to assist with that as well.
I don't see any other questions, Mike, in the chat.
Pretty much. So well, thank you all for participating and your questions. We wish you the best of luck in your planning effort, and we'll be in touch. Have a great holiday season, everyone. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.